Do you think AI is ready to take over managing a professional baseball team?
90% of developers are using AI in their daily workflow, but most of them still don't trust it. Google also unveiled the DORA AI capabilities model, which is a new framework that outlines 7 technical and cultural practices.
OpenAI and Nvidia have just announced an eye-popping partnership to build the world's largest AI infrastructure project, a plan to deploy at least 10 gigawatts worth of Nvidia systems.
Scale AI's new SEAL Showdown is aiming to shake up how we compare large language models by bringing real-world diversity and honesty into the rankings.
How can AI help millions of small farmers with unpredictable weather forces and climate change?
How would you feel if your doctor was AI? At Keto Labs, it's using LLMs to handle patient appointments and even make diagnoses. What if AI could design organisms that nature never imagined?
MIT researchers, in collaboration with Google's DeepMind, have introduced SciGen, a cutting-edge AI tool designed to fundamentally accelerate how scientists discover and invent new materials with disruptive quantum properties.
There's a lot of debate about if world leaders can agree on what are all of the ways we should use AI. But what if they could all agree on some bright red lines of how we should not use AI?
What content is legal and not legal to use when training an AI model?
Are you going to start streaming music made by an AI artist? AI artist has now signed the first sort of multi-million-dollar contract with her own record deal.
Annie, we have talked a lot about AI taking people's jobs. So here's a real one for you. Do you think AI is ready to take over managing a professional baseball team?
Which team?
The team at this point is the Oakland Ballers, and they're gonna try it out. They're gonna give the AI a shot. This will be the first professional sports franchise, in my knowledge, to hand the reins over entirely to an AI system. This will be on Fan Appreciation Day, and Oakland Ballers manager Aaron Miles will step aside and let a system built in just 2 weeks by AI from Distillery make the big calls, setting the lineup, swapping pitchers, calling in pinch hitters, adjusting field positions. The only thing it won't be doing is base running decisions. Apparently, that still requires that old hand signals and whatnot. So we'll have coaches out there doing the hand signals for the base running, but everything else handed over to AI. And so
This
this will be
is
really interesting to
wild.
see how this works. It is a little wild. Essentially, this is Fan Appreciation Day, and I guess last year for Fan Appreciation Day, they handed the reins over to the fans who could vote on what to do. So not exactly a full scale handing over in a permanent way, more of a little fun side experiment, but I should be really interesting to see how AI does managing a professional baseball team and not just like theoretical between game, who should we trade who for, but like actually managing the in-game coaching or managing or whatever you want to call it for a minor league professional baseball team.
Interesting. I guess maybe the important question is if you argue with the model, can you get thrown out of the game?
What happens if can the model? Yeah, we need the a little unitary robot or whatever to go out there and argue with the umpire and get evicted. Like that would really be when you're taking this to the full extreme. But you do need the drama, right? Like it's going to be less exciting to watch. Can't read the GM's face while he's sitting in there. Is he pulling the pitcher or not? I don't know. He's just going to be an algorithm running in the background. So we'll see how that changes the dynamic. Apparently, um, the the manager Aaron Miles will actually take during the press conference after will be there ready to step in if there's an issue, maybe to take it'd be great if the AI said, go get yourself thrown out of the game by yelling at the umpire. I'd love that. You got to go take over the job. But he's in the post game press conference, he's going to describe what he may have done differently than the AI system. So we'll get the take on human versus AI performance and decision making. Although of course he's got hindsight to look at. He should really have to make the decision what he would do in real time versus telling you after the fact when he knows how things turned out. So we'll see.
That's going to be super interesting and fun to watch, and maybe a fun sort of nerdy sports crossover not too far from the Silicon Valley. So I think if there was any audience that would be excited to see AI coach a baseball team, it's probably in and around San Francisco and Oakland.
That's right. Oakland's a good market to do this. Maybe get some tech guys coming to the game just to watch how it works or tuning in. I bet the TV viewership is a little higher than normal, or at least the YouTube replays will be a little higher than typical for the Oakland Ballers watching this game with all the tech guys going, how did the AI do? What did it turn up?
It will be interesting to kind of see because I think that the whole thing in a lot of industries and a lot of discussions that we see about AI is like, can the sort of like model-based decision happen faster than the human intuition, even when that human intuition has like years of training to sort of be optimized to make those fast decisions? I think, there's no question that's going to be able to make the decisions faster, but the question is, can those decisions ultimately be better than whatever those human-based intuitions end up being? And we've talked about that in courts of law, and we've talked about it in stuff like this, but we've never talked about it in baseball before. So I did not think that AI would be coming for a baseball manager's job, but this is interesting.
But here we are.
Here we are. Well, AI in sports management, like I said, kind of a new game. But what about AI in software development? Like the least new game, most common use case today. We now have confirmed 90% of developers are using AI in their daily workflow, but most of them still don't trust it, which is sort of weird and fascinating to be using something every day that you don't really trust. So what's driving the paradox? In Google Cloud's just released 2025 DORA report, the near total adoption of AI in software development is the headline. So 5,000 tech professionals were surveyed, and there were some pretty eye-popping trends. 90% reported that they're using AI on a daily basis. When they did this study last year, it was at 14%. That's a big shift. And so on average, developers reported that they were dedicating roughly 2 hours a day to AI-powered tools, and they're using them from everything to like actually generate code to also debugging code and also documenting what they've done. So there's sort of a broad range of different ways that AI is being used by developers. They have reported clear productivity gains. So 80% say that they have better efficiency, 59% say that they feel like they have improved their code quality, and it's led to sort of faster release cycles, which is sort of a reversal from previous findings that it was maybe slowing things down, which kind of makes sense when you start learning a new tool. It's going to slow you down at first while you figure out how to learn it.
Then you figure out how to use it. Yeah.
Once you figure it out, you kind of can reap the benefits. But the interesting sort of flip side of the study was that even though 90% are using it, like I said, 30% of people said, I only trust the outputs a little, which is like not very much, right? I trust it a little, or some of them even said I don't trust it at all. And so they are choosing to rely on the AI for speed and support, but then retaining a lot of human oversight as the ultimate sort of quality control. So this is very like we're definitely in the seatbelt phase. We are not in full autonomous cars with no seatbelts. We want the seatbelts.
This was a fascinating result to me. I know there's more to the story, but we should talk about this for a minute. I've heard a lot of people saying, I think there's a lot of truth in that as these tools exist today, they're best used by experts in the field where you understand. So not vibe coding by somebody who has no experience writing software, but a software developer who can say, hey, I've got this big task to do. You're going to do it. Maybe it's the 85 or 90% right, but that's okay because I know the other 10 or 15. I can figure out where the errors are. You're going to run into a little problem over there. I can solve that for you, but you've made my life easier and simpler. Similarly, when you're doing like deep research reports, it helps when you're an expert and you go, oh, you've simplified a lot of research I would have done. But when you make little errors, like I can spot them. When things are off base, I can see them because I actually know a lot of the underlying information. So in many cases, the best results are when you have an expert in the field whose efficiency is being increased, as opposed to going, yeah, I'm gonna talk about something I know nothing about and use AI to totally backfill what would be an expert level knowledge. This seems to really play into that mentality that this was a great tool, very productive for software developers, but it took a software developer because they went, it's not always right, but when I'm here, it's okay.
Yeah, that it makes a lot of sense. I was reading, I think it was Harvard Business Review this week about AI slop. I don't know if you've heard this term, but
I've liked this term, yeah.
AI has sort of led to a lot of slop being passed around where people will just sort of use it unjudiciously and then pass it along to their colleagues. And then the next colleague that picks up this AI slop has to like not only do whatever their job was, but also clean up whatever slop was handed to them. And so I was having a debate with some coworkers about this, and somebody said a comment that I think resonated a lot, which is AI makes great people even better, and it makes not so great people even worse. And so like that is the sort of in terms of work product that you might expect, which I think is it kind of resonates, and I've seen that. And so that's why, to your point, like software developers using the tool for their core business when they're actually experts in how to do that well so they can spot those errors is where the real juice is. It's less so people like me vibe coding whatever I'm going to vibe code. I'm much more likely to produce slop.
Yeah, I've vibe coded some things and they're functional, but they're definitely, I think were I to hand them off to a professional team to make them better quality, they would go, we need to throw away everything you've done and rewrite it. And you've been of no help at all other than creating a database that's in the wrong architecture. Like, thanks so much for that. But like, so knowing when and where to use them, that'll be interesting to see what these skills are that make you a great person in the context of being augmented in a positive way by AI versus kind of bringing out your worst instincts in AI. And I don't know exactly what that great person better and bad person worse, what that set of skills are that put you on one side of that line or the other, but figuring out how to be well augmented by AI seems like a really useful skill in this day and age.
100%. Well, so Google also unveiled the DORA AI capabilities model, which is a new framework that outlines 7 critical practices, both technical and cultural practices, that companies should follow to unlock the full benefits of AI. The common theme we've talked about before, and they say here, is it's not about just plugging in AI to whatever you do. It's really about evolving your organizational culture, your people, your processes. And so they developed an actual blueprint based on their research that laid out sort of 7 core principles to maximize the positive impact and avoid the slop. And I think these are pretty good. I like them. So here's what they are. Number one, clarify and socialize your AI policies. So as a organization, have clear policies, debate them, write them down, and make sure that people know what they are, and that can help sort of reduce risk and build trust. Number two, treat your data as a strategic asset. I read a thought piece one time from somebody who said data is the new oil, which I was like, oh, it's very interesting, but like it's that valuable, right? So data should be high quality, unified, accessible so that AI can actually make good use of it. Number three, connect AI to your internal context. So this one sounds obvious, but if people aren't doing it, then it's worth saying. But make sure it's linked to your internal code and your docs and your systems so that it's not just having a generic output, but it's actually something tailored and customized for your organization. Number four, double down on known best practices like working in manageable increments. So, smaller, frequent releases improve product outcomes relative to doing a whole thing, trying to boil the ocean at one time. And number five, prioritize user centricity. So, AI can speed coding, but only a user focused strategy ensures that faster outputs creates real value. So, really focusing on the end user as the goal. Number six, embrace and fortify your safety nets. Music to my ears. I love that one. So make sure you have version control, rollbacks, levers in case something goes wrong, and so that teams feel protected and they feel like it's not a one-way door. If they like put something out that's not great, it can be rolled back, and that'll help people feel safer and more comfortable at sort of the accelerating pace of product development if they have those safety nets. And then number seven, invest in your internal platform. So shared platforms provide guardrails needed to scale AI safely and effectively. So I don't know what you think. I think it's pretty good. I like the framework.
I like these. Some of them in the details they provide are kind of technical, like, doubling down. Small frequent releases is kind of a coding thing, but it very much mirrors the principles we see being effective. Like in my work, is a very simple example. When I'm working on the rundown for this show, if I give it 15 stories and go, please write a podcast script. Well, God help you, but that's just it's too big. It's gonna get all. But if I get one story and go, write me a little segment for this story, and then I do that 15 times, and then I say, here's 15 things. Can you help me stitch it? Like, what's a good order? What are some good segues? Then it actually can do that. And so understanding how to break these things down. So I think most of these are actually very good that way. Prioritize user centricity. We've talked about this a lot, putting these tools in context, in the workflow, understanding with the data integration is so much more valuable than like, hey, Mr. Doctor, here's ChatGPT. Good luck figuring out how to be a better practitioner of medicine with it. So these really resonated with me both at the technical level that they were developed, but I think are general principles for deploying AI in any enterprise context that really help people get the most out of the tools, and are really kind of more universal than just purely technical and for software development teams.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think like when you think about it, all of us know people who maybe like try to boil the ocean or put too much in at one time. And really, the focus on the smaller bite sized pieces are like really think deeply about whatever that problem is before you go to the next problem and then figure out how to interweave them. And I think, you use an example with the podcast. That's how you do it for the script. But I think so many things are like that of like, really dig in deep, get your hands dirty, figure out how this works. And I think that it's even more important when some model is like helping do part of the work for you.
Absolutely. I mean, you could see this kind of in any domain, similar to like writing in policies and work manuals and things. Like, you can't just say, "Hey, write me a whole new fair lending policy," but you could certainly use it in portions of that process. And so, making sure you understand where you're using the tool, where you're not, and how you're breaking it down to a task that is well suited for the tool, as opposed to here's the thing I need done. Like, I hope you're smart enough to do the whole thing. Like, it's just not there yet. And I think these are really good advice. So I recommend that. The Google DORA report was actually quite interesting, both in the depth of usage among software developers. But I thought this capabilities model was really interesting in terms of setting up any kind of wider spread enterprise use case.
Yeah, Jeff, I had to pause and laugh as I was talking about principle number 3 about connecting to your internal context because I said this seems so obvious, and then I'm reminded that last week watched you give a speech to a bunch of people about how to make effective use of AI, and one of the things you recommended was linking it to your calendar, and I think I probably had 10 people afterwards come up to me and say, "I had no idea I could link it to my calendar." So that was like a big aha takeaway for people, so it was amazing.
I always give that talk and I'm nervous that I'm gonna be like, everyone's gonna go, "You idiot. We know all this stuff. Like, who are you telling?" And then it's amazing how many people just aren't taking advantage of even some of the more basic projects and GPT or integrations with data sources or custom instructions and things like that. And it really does increase the power pretty dramatically if you figure out how to do that.
Yeah, totally.
Well, all these amazing use cases do depend on having good models and better models and companies that can afford to keep producing them. So, on the how are we producing new and better models front, got an announcement from OpenAI this week with a big hardware investment that is possibly the biggest leap in AI infrastructure in history, or maybe it's just an infinite money loop. I don't know. So here's the news. OpenAI and Nvidia have just announced an eye-popping partnership to build the world's largest AI infrastructure project, a plan to deploy at least 10 gigawatts worth of NVIDIA systems. Gigawatts. I feel like I'm watching Back to the Future, however many gigawatts we needed to, power our time machine. This is millions of GPUs, power for the next era of intelligent models and capabilities. The deal is anchored by a signed letter of intent, which will see NVIDIA progressively invest up to a staggering $100 billion in OpenAI as each gigawatt comes online, including help with data center and power capacity. First gigawatt, I love that we're measuring just in gigawatts now. We're going to launch the first gigawatt in the second half of 2026 using NVIDIA's upcoming Vera Rubin platform. But the interesting thing about this to me is like NVIDIA is investing money in OpenAI so OpenAI can buy, they're going to take NVIDIA's money to buy NVIDIA's products. Like those are going to be NVIDIA chips that are going into the data center. So it's kind of a weird business cycle where
Kinda genius.
yeah, I mean, but it feels kinda I'm like, I don't wanna say Ponzi scheme, that sounds wrong, and I don't wanna make that claim, but this is a really interesting that the person whose chips you're buying to put in the data center is giving you the money to use to buy the chips to put in the data center, and, is that a sustainable business model? It's not clear to me that it is, so it's really interesting to see the level of investment for sure for both companies, but also this kind of circular funnel of money from one company to the next and back it makes me question how sustainable some of these levels of investment really are. It kind of makes you think bubble, at least in investment. And that's not, I believe that bubbles can be a good thing, but it does feel a bit like a bubble when the guy whose stuff you're buying is giving you the money to buy it.
Great Scott, Marty, 100 billion. Well, it's funny, like all of these things, you started this segment by saying, are they going to have the money for these things? And I'm like, it seems like they're just all like 100 billion here and 30 billion here and all this stuff. Like it's kind of mind boggling to think about how much money is going into the infrastructure, the model development, all of these things.
Yeah, the numbers are truly staggering. I mean, just kind of like, when a company it used to be I remember when we coined the term unicorn to represent $1 billion valuation, and now people are spending 100 billion, not just being worth a billion or 100 billion, but spending 100 billion. I mean, it's just the numbers are outrageous, and it does make you think that there probably is a valuation bubble. I mean, but with all bubbles, there's a few companies that will have been worth it. There are a lot of companies that will have been not. But our last bubbles generated for us tons of consumer and enterprise surplus in terms of all the technology, like if none of these companies are worth anything, they still spend all the money building amazing models that we'll get to use for a lot cheaper as they realize that they don't have business models to support that level of investment. So we got dark fiber and tons of internet connectivity out of the internet bubble that was investments that didn't pay off for the people who made them, but we're all benefiting from amazingly ubiquitous internet now. So I think it's not a bad thing, but it certainly feels like another indication that we've got some degree of unsustainable levels of investment to me when you see this amount of money and in that kind of circular loop.
And you mentioned the circular loop a few times, but like who benefits the most from this? Is it Nvidia or is it OpenAI or is it really win-win? Like that is not clear to me.
I mean, it seems to be win-win, at least for now. I don't know who comes out on the top end of this. Certainly, it's good for NVIDIA to have OpenAI buying a whole bunch of their chips. Although, to be fair, NVIDIA seems to have nearly infinite. I mean, right now they seem to be supply constrained, not demand constrained, meaning they can't make as many chips as people want to buy. And if they could make twice as many, they would be able to sell them all. And so they are really right now supply constrained on their ability to produce chips. So they don't really need to give somebody money to buy their chips because those chips were going to get bought anyway. But certainly cements them as the standard for OpenAI and other AI model developers, and certainly $100 billion to invest in more compute is something OpenAI needs because while they do have revenue, they don't have enough revenue to invest $100 billion in data centers just yet. And so this helps them along the path of being able to do that. So, we'll see who wins. Maybe everybody wins in the end.
Maybe everybody wins. Well, these sort of mega investments are supposed to lead to smarter models, but how are we going to measure their success? We often rely on a variety of metrics and leaderboards to tell us, but it's unclear. Like, I mean, you and I are always talking about this benchmark or that benchmark and all these different things. And it's unclear really what's telling the whole truth, or is it just sort of some narrow view? Well, now we have another option for measuring success. So let me tell you about it. Scale AI's new SEAL Showdown is aiming to shake up how we compare large language models by bringing real world diversity and honesty into the rankings. I love this. So, not synthetic data, but actual human feedback. So every few weeks, a new AI model hits the headlines claiming to be smarter or safer or faster, whatever it might be.
Yep.
But the traditional leaderboards often rely on synthetic benchmarks or feedback from a limited, pretty tech savvy crowd. That means we don't really know which one is actually useful for all of the rest of us.
People. Yeah,
Um,
like people,
Real people until
regular
now.
people.
Yeah, regular people until now. So now we have SEAL Showdown from Scale AI, as I mentioned, which is a next gen benchmarking platform that uses a vast global network spanning 100 countries, 70 languages. So very diverse data set here to collect AI model rankings based on actual user preferences. So a bunch of testers out there doing real things, banging away on these models. And instead of generic scores, SEAL Showdowns break down performance by demographics like age, education, language, and soon by profession. And this is going to let businesses and builders see not just a model's overall score, but also how it performs for specific user segments. So if your customers all skew towards one way, maybe you have one model that's going to be better for them versus another. SEAL Showdown is also designed to be trustworthy and hard to game. So the data is actually blocked from sharing for a period of 60 days. So that way developers can't just figure out how to optimize for the latest leaderboard. Voting is optional, so that ensures that sort of feedback is authentic. And crucially, the insights are based on how people are really using AI in daily life and not just sort of like a handful of contrived tasks or tests that somebody in a lab cooked up.
Cooked up. This is fascinating to me because I do think it is true. We see all these benchmarks and how to perform on some math tests and some coding benchmark and some whatever. And you're going, it was already a PhD level of math. If it can solve the unsolved math problem, like it is not a relevant task that I'm asking any model to do ever, let alone daily. And so this kind of how do the models perform in different professions is actually really interesting, right? We know that Claude really popular among developers, seems to be a really good coding model, but ChatGPT, some people I think has a better writing style or whatever. So it will be interesting to see how these play out. And the 60-day lag it feels very like I don't love the suspense of like, oh, GPT-5 is out. Like, how does it perform? But it is a really interesting way to keep people from gaming the system in terms of seeing the results on day one and going and tweaking things and trying to chase the leaderboard in some way. So I don't know this. I love seeing at least more and different ways to evaluate what models are most useful, most effective, and getting beyond the simple kind of like, can you pass these standardized? How did you do on these multiple choice tests or these kind of very esoteric standards that don't really make sense for everyday use?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this kind of benchmarking, I mean, we'll see how it goes, but I think this it seems on its surface could be the sort of bridge between some of the stuff we've seen where it's like people are using AI but haven't found ROI from it yet. And part of that is because like, okay, we know this model is so smart. You know why? Because it can handle this like really intense, set of math problems. And then the people using it are like, guess what? I'm not doing math problems. Like I'm doing something completely different. And so actually having a benchmarking that's like, how is this useful for real humans who do real jobs and this type of stuff? Not that solving math problems isn't a real job, it's just that it's not a real job that many of us have. And so, like, there's probably a great model for that, but there's lots of other use cases that people are using LLMs for. So having good benchmarking to figure out which LLMs are good for which thing, I think is very important. And I agree with you on the 60 days. It's kind of funny because, in Silicon Valley, 60 days is like a lifetime.
Multiple eternities.
Yeah, like I'm gonna launch a new model by the time the first one's scored. But I think it is important from the gaming standpoint. So I like that they baked that in.
Yeah, so it feels like a good moment for that in terms of the rapidity of model releases seems to have slowed down to some extent. We're seeing some more normalization. It feels like a long time, but I think GPT-5 has been out for quite a while. I mean, like, 60 days comes faster than you think in many instances. And most of us that are building on top of models are integrating one at least 60 days of real usage of the model before we're like, yeah, we plug this one in and see what happens. So I think it'll work out well. It'll be a nice counterweight to some of the immediacy and gaming of the current models.
Cool.
Well, let's move on from our technical and product updates, of which there were plenty this week, and I already have some for next week that came out just before we started recording. Let's talk about a couple of AI in the wild kind of use cases, and we'll start off with, of all things, a topic we don't cover often: farming. So, how can AI help millions of small farmers with unpredictable weather forces and climate change? So, I didn't see farming come. We talk about education a lot, we talk about healthcare a lot, and they are coming up. But we're starting this week with farming, which is interesting. So, India's farmers are leveraging open source AI to track and anticipate the country's critical monsoon season, transforming agricultural decision making at scale. So, thanks to Google's Neural GCM and the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasts, AI systems. I love that there's a medium range weather forecast. It's like we got to have short, medium lines. There's a medium, there's a grande in there. Granular, high quality forecasts have become accessible not just to big operations, but to the most rural and poorest farmers. For instance, India's monsoon season arrived early this year, but then stalled out for 20 days. A curveball that would typically leave smallholder farmers vulnerable, but the AI system actually predicted that this was what was going to happen, allowing them to adapt their strategy to deal with that kind of early monsoon and then long stall. This push represents a broader democratization of weather forecasting. Until recently, running sophisticated weather models required hundreds of millions in supercomputing resources, maybe not hundreds of billions, but at least hundreds of millions, which outside the reach of most farmers. But now tools powered by AI and decades of rainfall data are connecting academic researchers with national government, startups, global tech companies like Google and Microsoft, and they're putting actionable climate intelligence in the hands of business makers and farming decision makers across the world. And granular forecasts, this is what's really important, not just kind of what's going to happen in this region, but in this area where my farm actually exists. So this is kind of a big deal. And it really raises the question for me, if AI tools are always going to be available to the people who need the most. Like, I wouldn't have thought of small farmers in India as in need of dramatic AI tools, but here they are. And thank goodness there's open source investments to make them available. But this was fascinating to me that we could get into farming and AI, and then it's really making a difference for people right here and now.
Yeah, I my brain sort of exploded when I read this story, thinking about how far as a species that we have come from even figuring out to do farming. My sixth grade son is in his sixth grade history class. He's learning about early humans, and he's coming up every day with interesting factoids. He's learns about how humans went from hunter gatherers to farmers. So like from there to now we use AI to predict the weather is kind of crazy. But you started this is farmers in India, and so I think it begs the question of like, is this sustainable? Can this be really technology that your average small farmer can afford to implement? Will it be subsidized? I mean, we subsidize fertilizer. We should probably subsidize things like forecasting. That seems like a good investment. But I'm curious how it actually ends up being operationalized globally and how that'll work out.
Yeah, I mean, this was some open source software, some kind of government level agencies actually running models, making predictions. Obviously, not doesn't require hundreds of millions of dollars anymore to run these weather forecasts. The AI dramatically reduces the cost, but it is really interesting when you think about a lot of these models, whether it's forecasting for weather, whether it's healthcare. A lot of the most valuable uses, at least from a human scale of impact point of view, are in places with the least maybe access to these tools. And so how we broaden that access so people can leverage these capabilities is really interesting, because we really do have the technology at our hands to solve many of the world's problems. I don't want to get into like geopolitics, but like farming, yields and farming, really big deal, particularly for people who are still living off kind of family farm, small subsistence farming, and being able to make that more effective or treat diseases more accurately. That's a big deal in these places, and making sure we can make these technologies available in those places has the potential to make a tremendous impact on millions and millions of lives.
I 100% agree. And after that impact is made, then second order, I would like an app for myself that's like just tells me when I should and shouldn't plant tomatoes and where in the yard to do them, because this is like an annual issue that my mom and I have. So that once the world farming challenges are solved and the AI is in the hands of the people who need it most, then I want an app
For your backyard farmer.
for the backyard farmer. That's right.
Okay. I'll work on that one. I'll vibe code it.
Maybe you can vibe code it for me. Yeah. All right. Well, let's shift gears and talk about one of our favorite topics, AI in medicine. This is a spicy question, Jeff. We've talked about your doctor using AI. How would you feel if your doctor was AI? So this week, we're breaking down a proactive experiment in the future of healthcare. This is coming from Aikido Labs, which is a medical startup in Southern California. It's using LLMs to handle patient appointments and even make diagnoses. So, this is what you need to know. Patients at an Aikido clinic can get an appointment much faster than usual, but instead of meeting with a doctor, they talk to a medical assistant. The assistant records the session, and then Aikido's proprietary Scope AI system, which is a suite of LLMs, takes over. It listens, it asks questions, it suggests diagnosis, it recommends treatments, and then a real doctor in the background sort of reviews and approves each case. But the heavy, heavy cognitive lifting and patient interface is coming from the AI. So, pretty fascinating. Aikido Labs sees its LLM powered system as a way to drastically improve access to care, especially for underserved populations, by allowing doctors to serve 4 to 5 times as many patients as traditional approaches. The company highlights the speed with which patients, particularly those on Medicaid, can get a specialist appointment and necessary treatments, sometimes within 24 hours, while still ensuring that all of the decisions are sort of reviewed and approved by a licensed physician. So, super interesting, maybe philosophical question. What's your hot take? Is this a good thing or a bad thing?
This is a dangerous question to answer. I'm of two minds of it. So I don't know. I'm like an economist. Like on the one hand, on the other. On the one hand, I'm not sure I'm ready to meet with an MA and have an LLM doing the diagnosis. Like I like talking to my doctor. On the other hand, I recognize that many people in the world that's a real privilege, and that we do. Or generally, every time I hear people going, "Oh, this can take doctors' jobs," I go, "Well, last I heard, we have too few doctors in America, let alone in most of the world." And the ability to have really high quality reasoning. This idea, I mean, here you can also have doctors who aren't on site who are reviewing that patient care, and maybe that's a patient didn't have access to a doctor, and so their choice wasn't AI doctor or real doctor. It was like AI doctor or nothing. And so I think in general, there's tremendous opportunity, but I also acknowledge that I'm not sure I'm ready to walk in and have an AI making my treatment plan for me. So I don't know if that makes me a hypocrite or what, but it certainly feels like it could be a good thing for the world, even if I'm not sure that I'm ready for it myself.
Well, the one thing that I love about this, so you can put me on team pro for this one, is that I think there's a lot of times, even for myself and for people I know, where it's like you have something, you should really talk to a doctor about it. But the headache it's going to take you to actually get an appointment, schedule appointments, see the right doctor is not worth it. So what do? You used to use WebMD and now you use ChatGPT. So you're just using AI anyway, but now you can actually go and use an AI that's gonna actually be reviewed by a doctor. I mean, it's like the question we talked about at the beginning of an engineer looking at code, and good engineers can spot when it made a mistake. A good doctor can be like, "No, ChatGPT told you the wrong thing here. Let me tell you this other thing, course correct," when that is true, right? Versus you looking at ChatGPT and being like, "Oh my gosh, I'm dying. That's too bad," right? Like, but I really didn't wanna make that doctor's appointment. So I think more people seeking medical care because there's more doctor time is freed up could be a potential, like, really good outcome from this. We'll see how it goes, but I do have to wonder on the, like, hospital front, the, like, liability tolerance is gonna be, stressful for large scale adoption.
Yeah, I mean, the right now, at least, this will be a really interesting policy question because right now, generally, there needs to be a physician overseeing, so that's a doctor reviewing and they do carry the liability for the ultimate diagnosis, right? They're responsible for the staff and the decision that's presented to the patient. I think that's not a terrible way to go. I mean, you're putting the provider on the hook, but we do see a lot of cognitive biases where once you've seen the AI answer, you kind of don't think as critically about the question. You're kind of like, yeah, that seems right. I mean, we've all done this, right? Like I have AI review legal docs. And I'm like, do I really want to read the whole thing? I just trust ChatGPT's assessment before I'll sign it, whatever's fine. So you do have to think about how we make sure that we're not falling into such cognitive biases and where the liability needs to fall so we don't stop this. But to your point, lots of not just people who can't access, but reasons where you might want to go to the doctor where you go, this is an ailment for which I'd like to see a doctor, but it does not cross the threshold of pain, which is required for me to actually get such appointment made. So I'm just going to wait and treat it on my own until it gets bad enough that it's worth going in to see somebody. That's not a great way to run a healthcare system, maybe.
It's true. It has to cross a certain threshold of pain for it to be more pain than the pain that is going to be trying to get an appointment. And so it's like a constant balancing act. So if you lower that second pain threshold, then you actually can get in and hopefully talk to a doctor more often, or an AI overseen by a doctor.
There
So
you go.
pretty interesting. Well, while we're nerding out on medicine, a little more upstream to the hard sciences beneath medicine and cures, we're going to talk about what if AI could design organisms that nature never imagined? So this is like the plot of so many sci-fi movies and shows. But But researchers at Stanford and the Arc Institute have just used AI to create the world's first completely synthetic viruses that can infect and kill bacteria. This is actually like a major milestone. It sounds terrifying, but a major milestone for science and medicine. Scientists basically trained a novel AI model called EVO on over 2 million known viruses. And then they tasked the AI with designing entirely new viruses from scratch. And the lab tests show that 16 out of 302 synthetic designs were fully functional. And then the engineered viruses had up to 392 mutations that had never before been seen in nature, including sort of combinations that human scientists had tried and failed to make in the past. And then what happens when they try to go and put these viruses to good use? What happens when is that the bacteria gets stronger and evolves to sort of be able to fight different things, right? So is evolving to resist natural viruses. Then these AI viruses can come in and actually slice through that resistance in days because the bacteria has never seen it before, because no one's seen it before, because it was made up in a lab at Stanford a few weeks ago. And so the traditional viruses failed, but AI designs broke through by combining genes in new ways. And so this could be like a pretty interesting sort of frontier for fighting bacterial infections and this type of thing, which is something that has been a struggle for a lot of years. Pretty cool. Also pretty scary because in the wrong hands, whew.
Feel like if there's any screenwriters listening to this, there's a movie here. I don't love the patient zero starting at Stanford, but I feel like there's a few horror movies, sci-fi movies that have had this as their rough plot line. So yeah, but this is fascinating, and it is a reminder. I like when we get chances on the show to remind people that like there are the LLMs that we all think of as the thing. We spend so much time talking about them, but these narrow models that are designed to predict or design, viruses are actually really powerful and maybe a huge part of where AI is going to make a real impact in the world, and not just replacing the conversational part of a physician's interaction with you, but actually predicting, designing medicines and viruses and treatments. And that's a pretty exciting thing, but a little different than the traditional LLMs.
What do you think about on the, like, ethics debate of, obviously, like, when I said can fall into the wrong hands, like, people using AI to create viruses, and could that put humanity at danger and this type of stuff? Do you have a point of view there or a hot take, or would you rather avoid the topic?
I know. I don't know if it's a hot take, but I just think AI is irrelevant to the discussion. Like I think so often we want to make this an AI story, and it's not. It's a genetically engineered virus story, and it doesn't really matter to me whether AI is engineering it or a really smart scientist in a lab in a creepy science fiction movie, whatever. Like it's a question about what kind of bio and geoengineering should we be doing, and the fact that AI it may become a more salient question because AI unlocks the ability to do this faster and at more scale, and so the nature of the risk changes because of the AI's involvement. I think fundamentally, as so many of these questions, AI is just you're focused on the wrong thing. The question is, should we be engineering viruses and what limits should there be placed on the engineering of viruses? Period. And whether you're using AI, well, I mean, who cares? It's not going to make anybody who gets a rogue virus feel better to know that it was human designed, not AI designed. Right. So to me, that's really the lines are just AI is not, it's just an irrelevant part of the conversation about the ethics of this kind of thing.
I like that. I agree with that take, and I think you've shared similar takes before in terms of, like, how we should be setting policy. It's like, don't focus on the AI, focus on how people use it, and, like, what is the actual risk here? Because AI might be today's tool, but, you know, 2 weeks 2 years ago, we had something different, and 2 years from now, we might have something still different, so, it's a good take.
I don't know how hot it is. I gotta turn up the temperature on our takes here maybe a little bit, get a little
It's a warm
little
take.
spicier. Warm. Okay, I got a warm take, lukewarm take,
Yeah.
like old bathwater. Okay. Well, let's shift from designing viruses to designing something that's even harder for me to comprehend, which is quantum materials. I don't even know what that really means. It's another sci-fi show. But are we on the brink of AI-powered discoveries that unlock the future of quantum computing and clean energy? MIT's new SciGen framework is changing how we create breakthrough materials. So not viruses here, but materials. So I'm going to tell you, I'm going to read this one because I don't actually know what some of these words really mean. And there were a lot of words in this article that I really didn't know what meant, but we try to summarize it for you here. But this week, MIT researchers in collaboration with Google's DeepMind have introduced SciGen, a cutting edge AI tool designed to fundamentally accelerate how scientists discover and invent new materials with disruptive quantum properties. So there you go. That's a part that I don't understand. Quantum properties. I don't know. Here's how it works and why it matters. SciGen equips popular diffusion models the type of generative AI often used for text to image or molecular design, with structural design rules steering them to produce materials that follow specific geometric patterns known to drive quantum behavior.
All right, so we can unpack quantum maybe on a different there's probably a podcast that would explain that to us, but can you explain what diffusion model means?
Yeah, so they're different than the transformer models that we kind of typically think of related to LLMs. And a diffusion model is an AI system that learns to generate new data like images or videos or material design by gradually modifying random noise until it matches patterns from its trained data. So it kind of starts with, if you think of an image like static, just starts with like that kind of standard white noise static screen and then keeps modifying it to look more and more like something from the trained data. Kind of like sculpting a statue from a block of marble, but guided by mathematical rules. And so this is what's behind most of your text to image and text to video models, but not what's behind most of your LLMs and chatbots.
Interesting. Okay, got it. And what is we talked about the great thing about the new benchmarking be how real people will use it. Is how will real people use something like this? Should I think about it, or is this just like a very nichey physics use case?
Real people won't use something like this, but just like the previous example, real people may use products created or enabled by this. So this is really about, how do you develop this one was mostly about quantum computers and the kinds of materials that have the Kagome lattice. And again, I don't know what the hell a Kagome lattice is, but sort of different kind of structures. They're going to modify these models to stick to a set of recipes that have certain physical characteristics or quantum characteristics that give them properties that make these really useful in quantum computers, which many people think will be the future of computing. And over 10 million candidate materials generated, about a million passed initial stability tests, and two of them they built in a lab. And the AI's predicted powers and capabilities of the materials actually match them. So, to me, it's kind of like we're talking about creating new viruses that have really practical implications in the world. In the previous story here, we're talking about materials, in this case, quantum materials for quantum computing, but it could be any kind of material, new batteries, better building materials, you name it, and using AI to help design those, which is, I think, really exciting and may dramatically increase the rate at which we can actually design new kinds of materials, which is really cool. There's a lot of places that we could use better materials.
It is very cool. It's cool slash mind bending, but that was our definite science deep dive of the week. But I love it. I think this is
And we
very
we
cool.
gotta say Kagome lattice, so I don't now I gotta
Kagome
look up what it looks
lattice.
like.
Yeah, that was Kagome lattice was not on my Friday bingo card for being
Not
able
on
to
my
say,
bingo
but
card.
now I got to say it. So
I'm
there you
sure we
go.
pronounced it wrong too, so somebody can write in and tell us that we not only used the word we didn't understood, but we pronounced it
Oh, we
incorrectly, which is
bastardized it.
par for the course.
All right. Well, let's transition to something that we have a little bit more hot takes, spicy takes, whatever it might
Mhm.
be, and end with a few stories about law and ethics. There's a lot of debate about if world leaders can agree on what are all of the ways we should use AI. Maybe that's going to be hard to do. But what if they could all agree on some bright red lines of how we should not use AI? There's a new global initiative that wants to really to do this, and there's kind of a pressure now put on for international action. So this week, over 200 influential leaders, including Nobel laureates, former heads of states, leading AI scientists and researchers, and then executives from OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google, have signed on to the global call for AI red lines. And what they're asking for is an international political agreement by 2026. I don't know if these Silicon Valley people really understand the pace at which
And then look at the climate
international
change
agreements are
initiatives we've
reached.
tried to we can't get any it takes, like, years just to get the meeting scheduled. Okay.
I know,
Bold,
exactly.
bold timeline.
Uh, this is their demand. International political agreement by 2026 on strict boundaries for AI systems and essentially a manifesto on what actions AI should never take, never impersonating humans, never self-replicating, this type of stuff. The announcement comes just ahead of the high-level week at the United Nations General Assembly and was led by the French Center for AI Safety, the Future Society, and UC Berkeley's Center for Human Compatible Artificial Intelligence. The initiative signals rising anxiety about AI's irreversible risks, which is pretty interesting. And the goal here is to really avert disaster by setting clear rules before a major incident occurs. 6 months ago, whatever, we were talking about like state versus federal. And I think AI has already come so far in this short period of time since that discussion that now, the leaders at these companies, OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, are like, it's not about national, it's about international. Like as a human species, we all need to get on the same page about this stuff, which is pretty interesting. So one executive director put it, if nations cannot yet agree on what they want to do with AI, they must at least agree on what AI must never do.
I'm not optimistic that they will agree on what AI should never do. Outside of a few, there's like, don't turn over the nuclear codes to the ChatGPT bot. To add like keep those. I think there's some obvious ones, but I don't know that this is going to. I'm pessimistic that we will come to international agreement on what the red lines should be that are not, just trivial.
I think it is a brilliant idea, and I have very low confidence in our ability to execute on said brilliant idea. So I share your skepticism, but I would love to be proven wrong because I do think it's actually pretty important. Nikki Iliadis, the futures of the company Future Society, argues voluntary pledges from AI companies are not enough. I think that's true. And she calls for an independent global watchdog with real power to monitor and enforce the red lines. So basically, like a global regulator of AI that's going to come in and say, okay, we agreed on these bright red lines about what you never do. Here's the watchdog that is actually going to make sure that you're never doing those things. And then UC Berkeley's Stuart Russell adds that AI companies should not build artificial general intelligence until safety is proven, just as nuclear plants were not built until we could really manage and mitigate their risks. So, pretty interesting idea here.
I'm going to give you two spicy takes on that because I think I'm more pessimistic than you are. I think we've already built artificial general intelligence. This idea that like, I think we've moved the goalpost, but like ChatGPT is as smart as an average human across almost any domain. In fact, it's smarter than most humans across most domains, even the ones in which they're experts. So the idea that I get that we want to build a super intelligent whatever, but like we have a generalizable intelligence today that is pretty good. And I think you've just got to accept that these models meet the bar of a general intelligence, not a very narrow specific intelligence. So just admit that we've like you can keep moving the bars to whatever you want for the next definition, but we're there. Um, and secondly, the nuclear power plant one is a fascinating comparison to make to me because I would argue that excessive worry about risks has led us to underinvest in nuclear power for the last 60 years. And it's actually been the safest form of power compared to coal spewing, smoke into the air. Instead, we've hobbled that industry by being worried about risks that were very remote, have never really happened. Even the Chernobyl disaster did not end up being nearly as damaging as we think. It's still including that nuclear is by far the safest form of power we have. And so, like, I really worry that this ends up like nuclear power. And it's like, oh, yes, this technology that could have been amazing for the world. And instead, we haven't built a nuclear power plant in 30 years because we regulated the heck out of it, worried about these risks that never materialized and standing in the way of the capabilities that could have been. And so I just think it's fascinating that somebody's actually referring to nuclear power. It kind of feels like a cautionary tale of overregulation to me, not the cautionary tale of underregulation, or a good example of like this is where we did it right because we just we missed a real opportunity, in my opinion, in nuclear power, and I think we have an opportunity to do the same thing here again if we're not careful how we draw bright red lines at an international level.
I think that's true. I would not have held that up as the poster child of regulatory
I
success,
appreciate
but
that they did. It's a nice opening.
yeah, but I do think well, all of the concerns that you just pointed out are the same reasons why this will never get done because nobody will be able to agree on what the actual bright red lines are that are like the ones that are universally agreed on that nobody wants to cross. There's always going to be someone who's like this group thinks we didn't go far enough. This group thinks we went too far. Blah blah blah. Like there's just never going to be an international consensus on what this looks like. So it would be very hard. Like it would be like a brilliant magical rainbows and unicorns for us to all get together and actually agree across all the different countries of what we should all be concerned about. But low confidence that that can be executed on.
We will wait to be proven wrong about the lack of execution in the space, but I think we can whatever your bold take on the rightness or appropriateness of this kind of policy, the idea that it's gonna happen at an international level with any kind of teeth to it, I think we can all agree is exceedingly unlikely. Particularly, there's a lot of other things going on in the world right now. It doesn't feel like world leaders are putting this on top of their list.
They maybe should though. Like AI is such an important development and I think that like it should be more top of mind for a lot of people than it is because there's so much opportunity and anyway, so I would love to see it move up the list and for people to stop arguing about stupid stuff that really is like, well, like maybe that one can be below the line. It affects like 5 people and actually like AI will affect all people. So,
We will, and if we do the right things, affect them in a positive way, which would be good. All right, we're talking about red lines. Let's talk about some more legal lines. We're in our kind of legal ethics section. I find it interesting. Not everybody that listens finds it interesting, but we enjoy this section. But here's another legal case emerged this week about drawing lines on what content is legal and not legal to use when training an AI model. So our last two stories here are going to be about music. I love music. I enjoy music. The Recording Industry Association of America, everybody's favorite RIAA, Great Trade Association. We all love it. That's sarcastic. Sorry. For those that are not familiar. They just filed an updated lawsuit alleging that Suno, essentially stream ripped copyrighted tracks and sidestepped YouTube's encryption, technically called a rolling cipher. Again, more words I don't really know that in depth. And that's a major violation not only of YouTube's terms of service, but also of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, known as the DMCA, which is supposed to keep digital locks intact on protected content. The labels are pushing for damages that run into the millions, demanding 2,500 for every time Suno allegedly bypassed YouTube's protections, plus 150,000 for every infringing track. That's a lot of money. The complaint even referenced Anthropic's billion-dollar settlement over book piracy, a case that's still unresolved, but kind of gave some precedent towards this. You can't get around copyright law or copyright restrictions like digital protections to access training data. What makes this so different is that it hinges on both copyright infringement and the anti-circumvention, targeting the underlying methods AI companies use to gather data. But Suno claims this is covered by fair use. It's the same legal theory at the heart of most of the AI copyright battles today. But there is some support precedent supporting this. Nothing definitive, especially as it relates to AI tools. This is a really interesting one because it's not just about can you use copyrighted works, but if there is some kind of protection, digital rights management, protecting you from accessing that data in some way, and you use technical mechanisms to get around it, does that change your right to use the data for training? And that's an interesting question. It's quite different than just can you use copyrighted works in your training data?
It is very interesting, and it's also an interesting full circle moment for YouTube because at the beginning of YouTube, wasn't everybody worried that all the content going onto YouTube might have copyright issues and they might have stolen it all, and now people are stealing it from them. So it's a very interesting full circle.
And the Recording Industry Association, of course, I mock this as their favorite trade association, but they were at the center of all the lawsuits around Napster and streaming music and online music, and they were kind of the force of trying to kind of stop streaming of music at the beginning in the early days. And of course, now the industry makes a lot of their money
On
on streaming
streaming.
music, so it's turned out well for them. But this is really interesting, and it makes me wonder if this lawsuit holds up, then there's this mechanism by which will that change the nature of how people publish content on the internet? The New York Times, there's no paywall, there's no digital, but if you start saying no crawling in your robots.txt, or you put up some simple mechanism the way YouTube does to stop you downloading the video, um, does that mean that all of a sudden the work that was freely available and maybe copyright wise was fair use becomes unusable for training because you had to circumvent a copyright protection mechanism to get it into your training data set? And that distinction, if it holds up, where you can use copyrighted works freely to train, but you can't circumvent protection mechanisms to access copyrighted works. Well, now this is a really interesting set of incentives for how we distribute content on the internet moving forward. I'm not sure it's a good one, more content behind paywalls and walled gardens like Facebook or Instagram, but it really could shift the way we think about content production distribution because it draws a pretty clear distinction between two types of equivalently copyrighted material and how you could use them or not use them to train AI models. So I'll be interested to see how this one plays out because it really is an interesting wrinkle.
It is an interesting wrinkle, but I mean, it's sort of similar to the Anthropic case we talked about too, right? Where like the focus wasn't on what the content was, the focus was on how the content was obtained. And so the judge said, like, if it was obtained through pirated methods, you can't use it to train your models, and otherwise you can. And well, it'll be interesting to see here if a similar type of approach is taken that, like, okay, if you got it in a way that was potentially nefarious or in violation of something, then it's not fair use, but otherwise it is. So we'll see if the sort of precedent set with Anthropic holds in this kind of case.
I think it's why they referenced it, right? It's a similar kind of stealing, but here it's a publicly available YouTube video, so you're not stealing it. YouTube just makes it very difficult to actually download the videos unless you're the owner. You can stream them, but you can't get the file out of it. And they, basically, I mean, it's a little more complicated than screen recording the video as it plays, but essentially they're just ripping it into a file locally. And they say, "Well, I can't do that." Well, this was a freely available thing. I didn't steal it, but so it really is an interesting technical distinction, but I think it could have profound implications on how people configure and leverage web and a mechanism copyright holders have to keep their works out of training of AI models without actually making them private. Just by putting something like a public YouTube video that's got certain digital rights management protection. So there's so many unanswered questions here. This is a pretty technical one, but I find it quite interesting because I think it could have pretty important implications for the future of the internet.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Jeff, last week we ended on a pretty heavy clip. This week we're ending with something light and fun.
All right, hit me up with the light when I'm ready for it. I'm ready.
All right. Are you going to start streaming music made by an AI artist? Maybe, maybe not. But whether or not you do, AI artist has now signed the first sort of multi-million-dollar contract with her own record deal. So all eyes
AI
are
record
on.
deal.
It's kind of crazy. Xania Monet, an AI-generated R&B artist, she signed a multi-million-dollar contract with Howard Media, topped by a reported $3 million price tag. Her most popular song on Spotify has over 1 million listens. I don't know if you listen to it. I have not, but I will after this episode. And her Instagram reels often exceed 100,000 views, so she's pretty popular.
Yeah, very popular.
She's very popular despite the fact that her likeness, her vocals, everything is AI generated. Xania Monet is the virtual brainchild of Mississippi poet and designer Talisha, also known as Nikki Jones. Jones uses her own lyrics and poetry, but the music and vocals are created with AI tools, especially the platform Suno, which we just talked about in the previous story. So Howard Media saw market opportunity. They locked in a multi-million-dollar deal after her song kind of hit the Billboard charts. And she was even included on she was number 25 on like the top emerging artist list. So like this AI is actually, yeah, becoming popular. So it's kind of unclear what the record label gets from the deal because the AI work is not copyrightable. It's all the stuff we've talked about. You can only copyright human produced elements, which seems in this case like it maybe is limited to the lyrics, but the actual music and the artist, the star is not copyrightable. So anyway, very interesting.
That this was a fascinating story. I just could say I'd love to get us to 1 million views as the podcast sometimes. I mean, that's pretty impressive. 1 million views on 1 million listens, like that's incredible. This really does push the limits, both in terms of what is it considered, like how much of the work has to be yours for you to be considered the artist, right? This one clearly writes the lyrics. It has, I'm sure people say that it's all AI generated, but AI doesn't generate without a prompt. You don't just shove the lyrics in and go, give me a hit song. You have to do some work of production and guiding it. And how copyrightable is how much does she have to influence the tone and style of the music before it does become copyrightable? And it's, you know, auto tune, people don't sing as well as you think they do sometimes, and auto tune solves it for them. And like, where on the line of auto tune and software to produce and fix up multi-track recordings to this, do you draw the line of is or isn't copyrightable? I think it's super unclear where we will land on that question. So that'll be really interesting to see, and then how much of the work really does she come credit for. But this is pretty cool. I did kind of want to get like the general manager from the Oakland Ballers. I wanted a robot to go out and physically sign ink the deal. But this is like really a person who's using AI as a tool, and it really makes clear how AI really is just a tool for these artists to create. And it broadens up. You know, she may not be a great singer, but she had a great idea for music, and here it is. She can produce that. So I think it's very very cool story. I'm very jealous of the listener count. We gotta work on that.
I know. I'm impressed. I think it's pretty cool. Maybe the second AI generated artist to close a deal is going to be my AI, right? Because I am in the same category of like love music, not very good singer. Maybe I can just use some
Well,
AI
when
tools
you
to
got
start.
your AI, virtual AI musician out there on Spotify, you let us know. We'll use what the AI as our distribution and promotion platform for you. But you know, between last week virtual podcasts and this week virtual AI powered musicians, it's a lot of real world use cases of AI in creative industries out there today. Pretty cool, exciting. I got to go open up my Suno and record before they get shut down by the RIAA and get my hit song on the emerging artists list. I don't think I've got those skills, but worth a shot.
Worth a shot.
Well, I think that's a wrap for this week of What the AI. We'll be back next week, as always, with more insights, breakdown, and just regular old head scratching What the AI moments. Be sure to subscribe, share this episode with any friends or colleagues you know trying to figure out how AI impacts their world. And if you got a question, an interesting prompt, or a story you think we ought to cover, drop us a line at email@whattheai.fm. We really do read all the emails, and we'd love to feature you in an upcoming episode. But until then, I'll see you next week, Annie.
See you next week.
Ready to expand your AI knowledge? Want to become the go-to AI expert in your organization? Take the next step with Upstart's AI certification for financial services. This comprehensive course simplifies the fundamentals of artificial intelligence for financial services professionals. Both the course and this podcast are brought to you by Upstart, whose leading AI lending marketplace connects millions of consumers to banks and credit unions that leverage Upstart's AI technology to deliver superior credit products, from personal loans to auto loans to home equity lines of credit. If you learned something useful this week, hit subscribe on YouTube or leave us a rating on iTunes or Spotify. Your support can help others discover What the AI. And finally, share your biggest AI questions and insights with us at email at whattheai.fm. We really do read every message and we do our best to cover them all on the show.